Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So today we are going to be taking a look at some new markers as the kind people at Ohuhu actually sent me their new Nahuku acrylic marker set. So kind of right off the bat, you can see that the markers come in this beautiful, nice little kind of cloth case, which is great because it allows it to be much more portable and to keep all your markers nice and safe, as well as keeping all of your other supplies clean, just in case if any of these markers do happen to spill or to kind of like break or bleed. But let's take a look at the markers themselves. So right upon opening up the case, you're greeted with a few things. So there's like a user manual, there is kind of like a little swatch sheet, as well as two sheets for you to do your own swatches. So these are done on kind of like nice kind of cardstock paper, and they provide a white one and a black one, which is great for acrylic markers, so you can see how vibrant and how much coverage these markers actually have. We'll be tackling the swatches a little bit later on in the video, but let's go ahead and take a look at the markers all together. So they do come on these little panels so that you can kind of flip through, and they have their individual slots for each of them as well. So right off the bat, you can kind of see that there's a whole lot of kind of very vibrant colors, as well as 3 sets of black and 3 sets of white, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but I find that very helpful when it comes to acrylic markers in general. But just before we do our color swatches, here's a closer look at the marker themselves. So right on the barrel, you have a nice visual volume display, so you can always see whether or not you're running low on any of your paint for your markers. A very pretty design with kind of like a metallic or foil-like lettering. The caps do have a little stopper so that it can prevent your markers from rolling, which is always very nice for something that has such a cylindrical round design. So this marker in particular didn't have it visually shown, but you can actually see whether or not your paint's actually properly mixed because there might be a little bit of separation. So be sure to shake your markers before use, and you can see the type of brush tip that this marker has. So it has a 1 to 5 millimeter soft brush tip, which is great for detailing alongside with covering some larger areas if you want to use the full brush to its fullest, I guess. And let's go ahead and do our swatches really quick so we can talk a little bit about the colors and application, and then we'll head on into making some sort of illustration or drawing for today. I think that one of the most tedious parts about getting new acrylic markers is always going to be swatching and having to shake up all your markers, but it's very important. As you can see, some of the markers have a lot of separation, like this mint colored one. So be sure to give them a good shake, get that little ball rolling so that you can kind of mix away the kind of like layer separation almost. And I find it very important to do this because once it kind of goes down into the tip of your acrylic paint markers, then you want to make sure that it's perfectly mixed so you have good coverage instead of like a weird light and dark separation from your paint. So here is our color swatches on the white sheet, and we have our color swatches on the black sheet as well. They have pretty good coverage, especially for just one pass. You can definitely layer up if you want to kind of have like even more of a denser, vibrant color. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, or if you've noticed, the swatch cards are not perfectly showing 48 colors, and that's because this set does include 3 blacks and 3 whites, which is great because I feel like if you use acrylic markers a lot, or there's like a certain type of art style, you might want to pull more highlights or cover up areas with the white acrylic marker, and then you might want to use black a lot for doing outlines and detailing. So it's very nice that they gave you extras because those is probably like the most used colors for acrylic markers. Well, let's move on to one of the drawings that we are going to be doing today, and we're going to run through this very quickly because I did not like how I drew Alua here. So right off the bat, I ended up using the palette Color ENO and the color red to do a very brief sketch of Alua from Genshin Impact on I believe this is a Paul Rubens linen panel. So basically it's a very stiff kind of canvas board type of painting material, and I like using this with acrylic markers. But right off the bat, I kind of noticed that I don't know if it's because these ones are so liquidy, which is great for coverage and probably use on paper, but it does require me to do a few layers. Maybe because of the harder surface, it might take a little while for it to dry, and maybe it just sits a little bit differently. So I did notice that some areas, especially if you have larger flat areas that you want to cover, you might have to do a pass or two to get more of like a perfect solid fill. But for the most part, these colors are very vibrant. I do like that these markers are the type that you don't really have to pump per se. I always find those ones to be a lot more messy. There's a little bit more like clogging. And for me, oftentimes, some of the automatically flowing ink ones that I've seen in the past as well, they don't have like a lot of paint in their reservoir. So even using it on paper or notebook paper, even on these canvas boards, I feel like the markers get very dry and it becomes a little bit harder to work with. But this one, because it's so liquidy and there's a lot of paint in the reservoir, I never had the feeling of it feeling too dry. So I was able to paint quite easily, let some areas dry, and then go back in and paint over some of the areas to get even more of like a higher coverage. Because I mentioned earlier that this kind of like acrylic paint marker does have more of a nice liquidy kind of finish to it. And because of that, while I'm like scrubbing back and forth, I might be pushing the paint around, which is giving it more of that streakier look. But some areas that I either do kind of like one pass without scrubbing back and forth, there is a better sense of coverage, or at least for me, that's how I found. So yeah, I actually had a lot of fun working with this because also, I like the versatility of the marker tips. So on the box, or I guess like how they're advertised, it does say it's like a 1 to 5 millimeter tip, and it kind of threw me off because usually you just kind of like you don't give a measurement, but it kind of makes sense because the very tip of the marker does give you nice fine lines as long as you're able to get some control, or if you don't mind having some slightly thicker lines, you can definitely have like more of an even pressure, which I'm going to kind of like test around for both this illustration of Alua and the second illustration that we're going to be doing a little bit later. But I do like how kind of like flexible and squishy the brush tip is, because I'm able to press down hard enough also to get more of like larger areas of coverage because I'm using more of the brush pen. But like I mentioned, so as I'm doing the line art now for Alua, I am trying my best to go as thin as possible as a test. I do think because the tip is like a certain material, it's only going to go so thin. So you're going to see me struggle a little bit trying to keep it like super thin versus like probably the ideal thickness that this marker can probably make, like about a 1 millimeter line, if that makes sense. So at some points I kind of like did end up just embracing the fact that I wouldn't be able to get like as thin hair-like lines because the brush tip is more like felt or foam probably, so it doesn't have like that hair-like quality, but you can still get fair amount of like smaller tiny details. And because the ink is so liquidy, it's very easy to put down marks, and because I don't have to worry about like my lines really skipping, or if I go too quickly or something like that, it might dry out in the middle of your line. I did not have to worry about that. So at least testing out the capabilities of seeing if I can get super thin lines versus thick lines on Alua was just good practice. I did, like I mentioned, end up just embracing the fact that he is going to have thicker lines, so I went back in, added a little bit more of line width variation to get more of a bolder look. And here's kind of our first test of Alua from Genshin Impact. Not my favorite. I did like using the markers, but I just didn't really like how I ended up drawing him. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of my previous acrylic marker drawings that I've done in the past. So these are on larger versions of the linen panels, and they're done with different types of acrylic markers. So I wanted to take the challenge today and do another one to kind of like add to our selection. I believe this one was also an Ohuhu brand based marker set that I did for Kachina, which I ended up really liking. So ended up doing Mualani, we have Kinich, we have Kachina, and I randomly did a Durin for a different video. But let's go ahead and add Auroron from Genshin Impact to our lineup, because a lot of you guys wanted me to continue doing the Natline characters for the acrylic marker sets. So let's go ahead and see if we can do him justice, I guess, today. So starting off with pretty much the same premise, I started with the Pilot Color ENO in the color red on kind of like the Paul Rubens linen panel. It's about twice the size of the previous one that I was using, and we're following a very similar process in terms of how I'm laying down the colors. So starting off with the skin tone, instead of relying so much on, I guess, like this yellowy color, Oh, I guess I really didn't talk about this too much. So color palette wise for this marker set, it's leaning more towards mid-tones, I would say. Very vibrant colors, by the way, which I really like because they're very much like eye candy to me. And I can see it how well they would work if you use it in conjunction with like pulling out white highlights or even using yellow, because there's some really nice bright yellows in the set, and using black outlines to make your things really pop. But it was a little bit harder for me to match Auroran's skin tone. He is very pale, if I remember correctly. And because I think Alua is too. But the colors are very vibrant and very saturated. So I was kind of debating whether or not which colors I wanted to use for the base of the skin tone. If I wanted to do stronger lighting so that I could use more of that yellowy color as like a very vibrant, bright, but still yellowy kind of like lighting on the face. So instead, I kind of followed how I did the one that I did of Kachina, because these ones have very similar colors, since Ohuhu, I think, has a very standard color set for a lot of their acrylic markers on kind of like just a base. So I ended up using the same base color for Auroron, and then choosing kind of like a pinkish color for the shadows. And I found that this worked a lot better. I think that was like one problem I had when I was drawing Allura, is the fact that I was focusing too much on trying to do too much color matching rather than allowing myself to pick colors that are just like similar-ish enough and just running away with that instead. Because you're gonna see today that I technically do not have all the colors that fit well for Auroran. So the color set, like I mentioned, has really nice mid-tone vibrant colors, which I think stand out the best alongside with using white and black, because it's not too bright where you can't use white as a highlight, and they're not too dark where you can't see your black outlines. So instead of kind of sticking to Auroran's very dark hair, his hair is kind of like dark blue, I would say, almost like an indigo ultramarine-ish color. But I ended up sticking with this. It's darker than a lot of the other midtones, but I wouldn't consider it like a dark color per se. So starting off with this somewhat of a darker blue, we're gonna add in purple for the highlights for his hair, because I wanted to make sure that his hair didn't read too blue overall in the end by use kind of like light blue for highlights. And then later on, we're also going to use black to help with the shadows, as well as a little bit of purple, I think, because in terms of dark colors, there's probably only very few in the set, because like I said, I feel like a lot of acrylic marker color palettes in general don't do a lot of the in-between colors. They usually either do pastel, mid-tone colors, and then maybe black alongside with maybe a dark blue and a dark purple is what I find that is kind of like standard for acrylic markers. And for me, as somebody who likes having typically a softer style, I would say, it does throw me off a little bit, but I can see why they kind of do that. Also, here's an example. I ended up making a mistake of kind of doing Auroran's hair. I could not tell which was his hair, which was like the hood part. So I ended up wanting to cover up parts of his hair with the light blue. And I noticed that the acrylic markers were actually mixing a little bit rather than just laying on top of each other. And it could be the fact that the formula for these acrylic markers are a little bit different, and the way they're sitting on a linen panel, which isn't like, it doesn't have super high absorbency. It is very much like a solid material, so I'm sure it's like not as absorbent as, let's say, paper and stuff. So some of my colors on the surface did a mix, even though I did let them dry for the most part. So if you are wanting to get these markers, I suggest also doing a test at some point on different surfaces that you want to work with to see how well they layer up, because I did find only a few times that some of the colors that I already let dry was being picked up again. So, you know, if you want to have clean application, just do a test really quickly, because I did end up doing a very tiny version of Kaisen. Not very well done, but I wanted to do a little bit of a test to see whether or not he was, I don't know, if the application was better on paper rather than on this linen board. And I did find that it did not mix as much when it was on a surface that was probably more porous. So yeah, just be a little bit wary. But I definitely think that if you work from light to dark, you shouldn't really run into that problem. But I like having the option of being able to layer up some of my lighter colors right on top of our midtones as well as our darker colors as well. And because of the surface being a little bit harder and less porous, I will have to do, I think, another pass of some of the colors to get it really nice and solid. Black was really nice to work with. It might be a little bit hard to see because of the lighting, and I'm sure that the black shouldn't show up really as patchy by any means. Some areas I did end up going in with a dark gray, and the dark gray did look very similar to the just black, so it might be that instead of what might look like a reflection of the paint or patchiness. So hopefully that will make sense too. So I think overall, personally, I would probably use these markers in conjunction with other ones because I do like the consistency of the paint itself and the vibrant colors, but also working with this particular brush tip was also very nice. But like I said, because some of the colors I feel like do require a little bit more coverage on these linen panels, and I do paint the most probably on these linen panels for acrylic markers, I probably would use maybe a different set. I do have a few other Ohuhu ones, so maybe using those ones in conjunction with these ones would probably be the best bet for me. But if you guys are interested in checking out the markers, feel free to check out their website and check out the links in the description to see whether or not they're suitable for what you want to work on as well. So for the most part, I'm trying to think, what else did I want to talk about for these markers? Oh, I guess like portability, because some marker sets recently, I definitely find that they've been kind of like flip-flopping between doing cardboard kind of packaging versus using a packaging that's like in a case. The thing I like about these ones specifically because of the case is the fact that one, they're all contained. I don't have to worry about them getting jostled around. They're kind of like perfectly snug in their case, alongside with the fact that you can flip the panels and have access to all the colors very easily. There's some other marker sets that do like tray methods, or if they do, I don't know. There's like acrylic gel pens, there's acrylic markers. Some of them do it in the trays where in order to access all your markers, you kind of have to have them all displayed out. And portability wise, not the best. At least for me, I would find that it's too cluttered. So having this ability to flip between the panels makes it a lot easier. I've also seen some people use these markers with alongside with just using acrylic brushes and like just normal painting brushes, if that makes sense, and using the acrylic markers basically as a way to carry acrylic paints, kind of like as a portable way, kind of a little bit mess free. And then you can blend your colors with a brush, or you can add smaller details. And I think that works the best because these markers are so liquidy. Like they have such good pigment and the consistency is great that you can definitely pick up some of the paint with a paintbrush and just use it as that as well. So that could be an option if you're looking for a portable painting medium and you like maybe the colors that these acrylic markers provide. I highly suggest looking into these ones if you want to. But before I blab a little bit too long, we are on the line arting phase. So because of what I experienced with trying to do more of a consistent line art for Lua, I wanted to give this a go again because one, I like doing finer details for hair and the face if I can, especially the eyes. And I think the eyes actually turned out pretty okay. So I was trying my best to keep a very even pressure and trying to let my hand glide across for the most part to get some thinner lines near the face that is mostly with like the hair that's framing it. And then later on, as we're working on some other areas, I'm pressing a little bit harder so that we can get more line width variation alongside with some bolder shadows and lines so that we can make some areas stand out. Because like I mentioned, some of these colors kind of do stick into more of that mid-tone area. So I want to utilize using black as much as I can to put a lot of contrast, pull out some areas from being too flat looking. So I need that contrast to kind of pull out some colors and push some stuff back as well. A part of me wishes that I could have approached this one a little bit differently and kind of similar to the one of Alua where I had the inkling of maybe having a stronger light source. It might have been a good idea to do that for Auroran as well so that I could utilize a little bit more of white and then having the contrast be a little bit more apparent. Even though like using the black was very fun to do the line art for the most part, I did have a little bit of a shaky hand when doing this. So, might take a little bit of practice to make sure that you can get a good line with consistency if you're looking for thinner lines. And I think the thinnest lines that I ended up doing was near the bangs that framed his face, but there is more of like a comfortable width, I think, when using the markers and trying to get like not pressing down super hard. But like I mentioned, it might be up to your own preference on whether or not that's something you want to do. And like I said, I've seen people use these markers kind of as their paint tubes basically, and using a brush and getting those finer, smaller details, which I think is very interesting. Maybe I'll try it in the future as a little experiment, because I'm kind of curious on whether or not that will work well for me as well. So in general, I think these would be great if you're working on the go. I feel like they're a little bit less messy because of just the nature of having acrylic markers in general is kind of nice. You don't have to have a paint palette per se. You don't have to be squeezing any tubes or having loose paint running around. I did find that because I mentioned how many times that this consistency of the paint is very liquidy, I did see that it does get onto the edge of the barrel because the way it's capped. So I did have some residue leak onto my weird little callus on my middle, or my ring finger, I guess, on my hand that I am dominant with, my right hand. I don't know why I said it like that. But it's a little messy, but I feel like it's far from, actually painting with acrylic paints on a palette or anything like that. If you guys have used any type of like acrylic marker, you know that you can also blend with your finger if you want to do more of like gradations probably, or anything that needs a little bit more of that softer look. But here's kind of a look at what Auroran kind of looks like right now. Some areas I did do an extra pass. You can see on the purple area I was kind of struggling because I didn't mix my marker properly, so there was a little bit of layer separation which I could have covered, but ended up just leaving it because I don't really mind if there is too much separation. It's a little bit harder to see from far away. So hopefully me drawing Auroran today gives you a good idea how these markers work, and I'm glad to add him to kind of our little lineup here. And Duran, I guess, because Duran's not really part of the Natlan gang per se. So yeah, maybe in the future I'll do another one. Maybe we'll mix the markers together. If you guys want to see that, let me know, and let me know who you would like me to draw next on these linen boards, because I have a few more that I can work on. And here are some of the past ones. So Alua from earlier today, I have Ivan and Till from a different one, and I also have a Naxa from a different session as well. So you can see that I always love using these acrylic boards or these painting linen boards for acrylic marker paintings. But hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me paint Auroran and Aluga today, and thank you again to Ohuhu for sending me these markers to try out and show you guys. And I think that's it for today. I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!